Adam Kinzinger from Illinois.
Thank you for being here.
Good morning.
It's very, very appreciated. Thank you for your service. Thanks for spending the time with us and delving into a lot of important issues. Mr. Chairman, I'll point out the clock needs to be reset. Otherwise, I'll go on forever. Anyway, so just thank you for everything you've done and for being here. A lot of important issues we're discussing. I think there's no more important issue than Syria, which I know you've touched on. But when we look at world stability, when we look at the war on terror, when we look at American safety, I think it's important that Americans understand that what goes on in Syria affects us here, and that the brutal regime of Bashar al-Assad, backed up by the Iranians, backed up by the Russians that are bombing hospitals with GPS or precision-guided munitions, secondary strikes against the same hospitals, are actually creating a whole new generation of terrorists. In fact, there are some in this body that buy into the argument that strongmen somehow work in the Middle East. And I think it's important to remember that with the era of information and the era of being able to communicate, people simply don't like to be oppressed. Some people maybe think that they enjoy being oppressed, but people don't like it. They naturally desire freedom. And in that process of being, whether it's a chemical weapon attack, whether it's a conventional weapon attack, losing your father or your mother or your child makes you much more likely to join an opposition force, which up till recently appears to have been ISIS in many cases. I want to thank you and the administration for putting what I think was an amazing red line down in the statement about a pending potential chemical weapons attack. As you said earlier, I think that saved countless lives. There are a lot of children that now hopefully can realize their dream of being a police officer or a teacher because of that really strong line. So it's great having you there. It's great having an administration that understands this. Let me just ask a little about Syria and the discussion of that next generational war on terror. I think it's the 7- and 8-year-olds today that are in the refugee camps that are either not getting education or are getting education, that are going to be either the folks that in, frankly, 5 years, because that's how young they recruit them, that we find ourselves having to fight on the battlefield, or else they're going to be the generation that actually rejects this ideology from within. Can you talk about kind of the difficulties in the refugee camps and the difficulties, I guess, in Syria generally, and how that plays into the long-term fight on terror that we have on our hands?
Yes, and so first of all, with Syria, I would remind you that the post-ISIS decisions that are made on Syria are going to be extremely important to make sure that it's not a new breeding ground for other threats to come in. And having talked with the Syrian refugees, both in the camps and outside of the camps, they are completely ready and waiting to go there and build it back up from scratch. They want to go home. They have family members there. That's something that I think is going to continue to happen. When it comes to the education, so what we know is the refugees that have come out, those children are they're getting educated, they're getting assistance, they're being well taken care of. All of those things are fine. There are about 300,000 students in Turkey that are not getting educated, but the 3 million people are, and they're trying to accommodate that, and that's why I'm trying to get the UN to focus on supporting host countries so we can get those kids educated as well. In Syria, I don't think they are getting educated in Syria. Now, I'm sure every area is different, but it's just such a mess because we're just still trying to get aid in there. We're still trying to get food in there and make sure that they're taken care of. But it's not just in Syria, in any area around the world. If you have children who have to do without, whether it's education, whether it's health care, any of those things, they are prime targets for terrorists to get them. And we have to always remember that as we go forward, because that is, yes, we can defeat ISIS today, but those threats will go on forever. And that's why I put so much emphasis on human rights as it relates to conflict, because those things are what drive terrorists to come in and take advantage of the situation.
And I thank you for being part of that whole of government approach. I mean, I think sometimes we get mired down in this idea that when the Islamic State is defeated, we can all come home and have fun, rainbows, and happy time. But the reality is you can't defeat an ideology with bombs and bullets. You can only defeat existing terrorists. And so it's important to think long-term because, frankly, this is going to be a long-term war. And I think, you know, specifically a great country I got the privilege of visiting was Liberia. And there's a strong UN mission there. I think it's important to note that when we talk about the United Nations, though needing reforms, can be a force multiplier, doing things that our troops don't have to do. But you see in that a whole generation that was torn apart by civil war, and people that mean and want to do well, but you see 30-year-olds that don't know how to read and write with no hope. And when that happens in the Middle East, that is a fertile ground for recruitment. So again, I just want to say thank you so much for your service. Thanks for being here, and I'll yield back.
Thank you very much.
Joaquin.